Hello, coaches. Welcome back to another episode of Coach Better Spotlight. My name is Kim Cavino, and I've worked with hundreds of teachers, coaches, and leaders in schools around the world to help them create thriving and sustainable instructional coaching programs. And I'm on a mission to help you coach better. Wherever you are in your coaching journey, we can support you. Come learn with us in one of our courses or private mentoring packages designed specifically for instructional coaches. Join our global Coach Better community, ask any questions you'd like to hear us answer, and find all of our resources for instructional coaches on our website at coachbetter.tv. You can also find us on social media at Eduro Learning or in our Coach Better Facebook group, and subscribe to our channel here on YouTube to catch all of our latest videos. If you're not sure where to start, take our free quiz and get a tailored list of our best coaching resources delivered straight to you and designed specifically for your level of coaching experience. Find it at coachbetter.tv/quiz. Today's episode is part of our special series featuring real-life coaching conversations with one of my amazing clients, Vicki Heipel, who at the time of recording had just graduated from our course for classroom teachers moving into a coaching role called Getting Started as an Instructional Coach. Huge thank you to Vicki for being willing to record this session and then share it with all of you. Over the years, I've had many requests to see and hear what a coaching conversation looks like in practice. This can be really hard because for the most part, those conversations need to be private. It's hard to be vulnerable in a space that will become public. It's hard to have a conversation about challenges when you know others in your community could hear them. But Vicki has very generously allowed us to record this coaching session so you can get a peek into what these conversations look and sound like. This is part of our series featuring coaching conversations. So if you like this one, keep your eyes peeled for the rest in the series and head back to see the previous ones we aired last season. I am very excited to share this episode with Vicki with you because the topics we talk about are exactly the kinds of questions that we get asked all the time, particularly from experienced classroom teachers who are either moving into a coaching role for the first time or curious about moving into a coaching role. In fact, this exact conversation is an extension of many of our previous chats that Vicki and I had in the Getting Started as an Instructional Coach course. Because I know Vicki well from our work together in Getting Started as an Instructional Coach, this is a coaching conversation that demonstrates how a coach who knows their coaching partner well can identify when to continue asking questions because their coaching partner likely already knows the answer and just needs the confidence to verbalize it, as compared to when it might be right to offer an opportunity to hear some advice. This conversation demonstrates how a coach can help their coaching partner prioritize their next steps, how a coach can be invitational in offering an idea or a pathway forward and ensuring that their coaching partner has agency in the direction of the conversation. This conversation demonstrates the pacing of a coaching conversation when you allow yourself the time to slow down and let your coaching partner process their own thinking, rather than trying to jump straight ahead to the solution. And finally, this conversation demonstrates how the arc of a coaching conversation can lead to a big picture aha moment at the end, even when that's a big jump from where you started. Plus, this conversation is about one of the biggest challenges that educators new to coaching face. How do I stop giving advice? If you listen carefully, you will hear many different strategies and suggestions that Vicki is processing through in her thinking that you might be able to apply in your setting too. Before we jump into the call, I would like to invite you to look for the moments where I'm making decisions about how to navigate coaching stances, how I'm supporting Vicki in making decisions and prioritizing her next steps, how coaching can be intentionally invitational, how the pacing of a coaching conversation has a big impact on your coaching partner's ownership of the outcome, and how coaches are intentional about moving through the arc of a single coaching conversation. At the end of the call, I'll come back with a few thoughts to wrap up the episode and share a little bit more about our course designed for experienced educators moving into a coaching role that Vicki just graduated from called Getting Started as an Instructional Coach. Okay, let's jump into the call. Computer. All right. Hi, Vicki. Welcome to the Coach Better podcast.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
I'm excited to have this conversation with you. We have been working together in the Getting Started as an Instructional Coach course, and I've known you for a long time virtually, but over the course, we've got to know each other better. We've had a bunch of coaching calls within the course, which has been awesome. And now today we're going to dive into some specific questions for a call for the podcast. So I'm super excited to record this with you. But before we get into that whole conversation, tell me a little bit about your journey to education and where you're teaching now so we can kind of set the stage for the conversation.
All right. Well, I teach in a small town in Northwest Montana, the United States. And I don't know, it's small for us, but technically it's like an A-size school. But I have about 6 total sections of biology, and I teach 4 of them. And then I also teach an astronomy class in the fall, and I teach forensics in the spring, and I teach an anatomy this year, but that usually changes. So that's what I teach. I've been teaching since around 1994. I took a couple of years off to stay home with my kids. And I've been teaching at my current school probably around 18 years. So I started mentoring about 3 years ago, and I really enjoyed working with other teachers, and then started working with teachers in the building a little bit more, not just the mentee that I have. Our coaching program that mentors teachers from smaller schools that don't have anyone in their department. I have 2 other teachers that I teach with in my department, but most of the small schools, you're teaching all the classes, which I'm sure there's many people who can relate to that. So they started the mentee program just so that they would have a way to help teachers want to stay in teaching and not feel so overwhelmed.
That's amazing. And I love that however this got developed, you're able to support those teachers that might be feeling overwhelmed and feeling like this isn't the place for them. And so having that support is so invaluable. And I love hearing about your setting, because as we spoke about just before the call, it's very different from my setting. I live in a highly urban environment here in Bangkok, Thailand. So it's really interesting to hear about that. So I know the number one question that you wanted to kind of start, or the first question, not the number one, but the first question you wanted to start our conversation on is how to get away from that feeling of needing to fix teachers. And you have kind of a complicated situation here, right? Because on one hand, you're learning about instructional coaching and you're learning about how instructional coaching works, but you're also specifically a mentor for teachers with the intention of helping them grow into a teaching role, maybe from not having any experience teaching before. So tell me a little bit more about what you're thinking about in terms of fixing teachers, and let's see where we go.
Okay. I think because, I don't know, probably for the last 10 years, I've just been studying best practices and realizing even simple mistakes that I've been making where you can just tweak it a little bit in what your instruction is. And you see such a great difference. And then if you either hear a student saying, here's what happened in my class, or if you hear teachers complaining about the same thing that you had struggled with, but you kind of know some suggestions of what might make that better and what you could try. Sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes my initial thought is, oh, I could fix that. I could fix that. Like somehow it's me, when I know that's not what coaching is, but that's still kind of my default setting of how I originally think about that issue or issues that come up that fit that category, I guess.
And as you've been wrestling with this, what have you already kind of started thinking about or changing your mindset on, or opportunities have you been seeing to be able to transition away from the concept of fixing into more helping them uncover what is going to work best for them? Have you been making some transitions in your thinking, or are you still I just need to fix these things here and now?
I think I'm aware of the fact that I'm saying that my inner voice is saying that. And I know that's not what coaching is, just from taking your course and understanding it from a overview, the umbrella perspective of what coaches really do for teachers and how you're helping them develop their capacity and their potential, and not just going in and saying, here's what you should do differently and leaving, right? It's not a one-off and it's not a judgment thing, but I think that was just kind of in my original thought is, how am I going to stop thinking like that?
When you feel like you can, no, that totally makes sense. Because you also mentioned in our notes for today's thing, the conscious competence ladder, which is something we talk about in the Getting Started as an Instructional Coach course. And I'll just give a tiny background of that. I know you know what it is, but the conscious competence ladder is like when you don't actually know that there's something you should be doing, you have unconscious incompetence, and then you have conscious incompetence. You know you should be doing it, but you don't know how to fix it. And then you have conscious competence. You know that you should be doing it and you can fix it when you pay attention. And then unconscious competence, you just do it, right? So like what you're talking about now is conscious incompetence, maybe because you know you shouldn't be thinking that thought, you're aware of it. And so that's like a huge step already, is that you aren't going into these conversations thinking, I just need to fix this person. So I'm wondering, when you're having that moment where you're like, I want to tell them how to fix it, what do you say in your head, and what do you then say out to the person? Like, what have you explored already?
Right. Part of me, like sometimes I find myself having that thought when I'm not with the person I'm coaching. And it's just by myself thinking about the situation. And so far, I guess some of the situations I've been in, I can hear them explaining their issue and talking about their issue. And I'm thinking in my head two or three, and I don't want to say fixes, but two or three things that I could suggest to them of how to approach it differently. Sometimes I am asking them more questions, but I feel like I'm maybe using that coaching light scenario in my head and thinking that they're asking for an answer when maybe they're not. So maybe it's, for me, maybe it's just I need to ask maybe for more clarification for them so I can determine for sure if they're just saying, just tell me what to do, or I'm at my wit's end. Obviously they're not using those words, but if I'm hearing that in their tone or what they're saying, if I can somehow get better at asking that, because sometimes I just jump in and say, hey, try this. And I can, if I'm thinking back and reflecting on some of the conversations that I've had within the last month, even if I would find myself maybe even showing them or acting it out or modeling in that small one-to-one conference of what to try. And maybe part of me is thinking that I've heard them and they're asking for an answer, but upon reflection, I'm also wondering, should I have asked another question first?
So when you think back to those conversations and you're kind of thinking, maybe I should have asked another question, or should I have asked another question? What kind of question would you ask?
Let's see. I'm wondering if it would have been best to have said, what have you already tried? And just thought through with them, or listened longer, I guess maybe is a better way of putting it. So that I'm not giving them something that they have already tried. Even though I guess in the one specific one I'm thinking of, I didn't have any notion from them that they had tried this yet. So, but I'm thinking that might have been a smart thing to ask next. What have you already tried?
So what I'm hearing you say is you have these moments and you kind of automatically go in your head to, oh, this would solve that problem. But you're conscious of trying not to do that. And so you're thinking, I got to ask another question. But sometimes in the moment, the questions that you're asking are not as direct about the work that's happening in the classroom as you might want them to be, to uncover what they're really asking of you.
Right.
So the questions you're looking for in this context that we're talking about something in like abstractly, but you are thinking of a specific scenario. What you're saying is you need to really better understand what exactly the teacher has already done and what exactly they're asking in this moment in time, so that when you're either asking the next question or potentially offering to provide them an idea, a solution, inspiration, whatever it is, you know that that's actually what they want.
Right. Just that double check question. I guess other scenarios that I can think of, where the teacher has maybe even had less experience, I'm probably more quick to jump into an idea than to ask that question. So just some uncertainty around that, I think, is where I'm at, especially with the concept of when I'm coaching them or when I'm talking with them and discussing things with them, I don't think I'm thinking I have to fix this in my head. I think that's like either a before or an afterthought that I've had after the situation. But um, when I've reflected on what's gone on in the meeting, I have thought, gosh, I probably should have asked a few more questions or even shared data. So that's kind of what one of the other things that I was wondering about is like, if I was just giving them the data, maybe they would see that themselves. But I haven't got too far into what I would say quality observation collection of things. So that's maybe not it's not strong suit, but it's definitely not something I feel super comfortable with either. Um, yeah, I do feel like I'm maybe offering suggestions maybe too soon. And I don't know how you would determine where that is, but
That's the next question I want to ask you. What makes you think you're offering them too soon? What is happening in the moment?
No, I think part of it is determined by like how much time you have to meet with the person and how much you're maybe wondering how much you can help them, or maybe I'm thinking even what's their perspective of how long are we just going to ask questions kind of a thing. And it's not like it's a hallway conversation where I would just give an answer. It's us working together in that 45-minute period where
everything you just said is exactly what goes through every coach's mind. And I think you didn't say exactly this, but the thing I was thinking as you were talking is like, how can I prove my value to them? How can I make them want to keep working with me? And so there's this constant pressure of like, if they don't feel like they're getting a solution like this in every conversation, then they're not going to want to have another conversation with me. And we happen to be recording this call at the time of another podcast conversation going live. So if you're an active listener to the podcast, you'll know when we recorded this call. But the call that's going live tomorrow is about the power of intentionally slowing down coaching conversations. And it's been something that has been really like just circling in my brain and resonating with me for months since I had that conversation with that particular guest, Sasha Robbins, who's another amazing client of mine. But I feel like there's this tension in coaching calls between solving the problem and actually building capacity within the person. Because a lot of times there is a problem that's tangible and we can solve it in 5 minutes and then they're going to be happy and they're going to walk away. But you know the quote that I reference in the course, because I say it all the time, is if our goal is to build capacity, then providing solutions and just answering questions flies in the face of that. And that's from a conversation with Laura Lipton, another podcast episode. So I'm wondering, if you're feeling this pressure and you're feeling this tension of like, but I want them to want to keep doing this more, and the way they're going to want to keep doing this more is they get solution after solution, how do you know what they want? How can you uncover that?
Right. I'm probably going to need some sentence stems that are a little bit more on the asking them for clarifying and repeating back to them what I'm hearing. So what I think that you're asking for, or what you're saying is, or what you're struggling with is kind of things, adding a few more clarifying questions to wait for them to either agree or disagree with me.
How does that feel? If you tried to say something like that, how would that feel to you?
How would it feel, or what would it sound like?
How would it feel was the first thought that I was wondering about.
I think if I were to paraphrase back to them something like, so I hear that you're struggling with maybe some classroom management, or maybe you're struggling with coming up with some ideas. And if I were to say something along that lines, just to double check with them, would you like to hear some suggestions, or are you asking for some? I'm not sure if that needs to be two separate questions, but to get some clarification on what they're asking for, and if they're asking for a choice of solutions or some options for solutions, would probably be the place I need to go, I guess, to maybe make that feeling of, did I do the right thing, go away.
Yeah. And it does sound like you're wrestling with one or two questions, and would you like to hear my advice?
I would.
I would split it into two questions because I
Okay.
do think, you're really asking two things. You're like really clarifying what they're saying, and then you're asking them like pretty directly, what do they want? Like, and a lot of times people are going to say, I just want a solution. But sometimes when you paraphrase what they said a little bit, you can see that they're like still thinking it through and still figuring it out. And so then you might not be ready to ask I have a thought about that. Would you like an idea? You might see another question might emerge in that conversation. And that is exactly what this podcast episode is about. The power of slowing down, intentionally slowing down coaching conversations is about when you give yourself a little bit more time in the conversation and you don't feel that pressure to rush through. Not only does it feel like I am being given, as the coaching partner, I am being given time to process my thinking and I am not rushed, but it also gives you as the coach the time to actually think about, well, what is the question that's going to prompt them to say, oh, good question? Because that's kind of what we want, as opposed to, oh, yeah, that's a solution I can just write down in my notes. Oh, that's a question that's going to get me to think about my own thinking and possibly change the way I do things in my classroom. Because we all know what it's like being a teacher, writing down our notes and from going to a conference or whatever. Those notes get put in a book, they get put on the desk, they never get looked at again. So it has to be something that helps them make a click in their brain. And sometimes
Right.
it's not just giving the answer, it's like giving them the question that
Right.
prompts them to think differently.
Right. I think too, part of that, maybe even just learning to put less within the agenda of what was supposed to occur during that time would probably help slow down that
Yes.
situation. So I know sometimes as teachers, we don't have a lot of time at all for the things we need to do. And so if a teacher comes to you with, here's my situation and we want to talk about this, but I'd also like help with this, how do you make them feel good about, let's just tackle one thing? I know we probably won't get to this. I feel like that maybe would make me feel like I didn't support them enough. And if, as a teacher from that perspective, maybe I would feel like I didn't get what I needed from that session or something like that.
Yep. What's your gut instinct? If someone came to you and they gave you a list of things that was like going to take you knew to do properly was going to take you like 3 hours, but you have 45 minutes, what's your gut instinct about what you might say in that context?
Right. I probably would say which of these things is the most important for us to dig into today and to accomplish today. I feel like that has been part of the conversations that I've had with a few people, and they've maybe said, well, let's just recap this, but I'd like to spend more time on this other thing. So that sounds familiar. I just need to kind of remember that in all the situations.
Yep. And when I hear you doing that, you did it so beautifully. And what you're doing is you're giving agency to the teacher. You're not telling them, I think we should focus on this. You're
Mm-hmm.
asking them, you could even say, given that we only have 45 minutes, which is the most important one you want to get to first? They know. You don't need to take that agency away from them. They know which one they want to get
Right.
to first. And you can also, as as you're thinking about that and thinking about pieces that you put in your toolkit, I know it doesn't always feel comfortable to like set a timer, but sometimes that's really helpful, right? Is like, okay, how about if we agree that we're going to spend 10 minutes on this topic? I'm just going to get out my phone right here and I'm going to set a 10-minute timer. We're both in agreement. And when the 10-minute timer goes up, we can decide if we need to keep talking about this or we want to move on to the next thing. But, you're 100% right that our time is precious, and everyone, well, I shouldn't say everyone, but many people, myself included, tend to put a lot of things on an agenda that we hope we can get through. But the reality is, if we want to have a meaningful conversation, we probably can do half of that. And I try to always tell myself, I think there's it's like a Chanel quote, and I am by no means a fashion person, but it's like, pack for your vacation and then remove 60% of what you packed or something. There's like some adage like that.
Yeah,
That's what I think
pack
about
less, buy
meetings.
more.
Yeah, but that's what I think about meetings, right? It's like you think
Yeah,
you can pack 10
right,
topics into this meeting, but you can really talk about one.
right. Yeah, that's good to just have that said out loud and process it through. So even though it sounds like something that I already know and am occasionally using, that it's like that freedom to know that that's the right thing to do.
Yep. And you already have a way to share that or say that in your conversation that comes very fluidly to you because I just asked you, what is your gut instinct? And you right away had something. So some of this is also about trusting what you already know
Right.
in your practice as a coach.
Yeah. I think too, with as far as the timer is concerned, I definitely took your suggestion that you used on one of your podcasts, like the most important question or something like that, change your life. But it's the one about the um what was the most important thing or what is your biggest takeaway at the end, right?
Yep.
So definitely used a timer to make sure I'm like, okay, this person wants to be done by this time. I'm setting my timer to be done 10 minutes early because
Nice.
that's important for the teacher to be able to tell you what the most important thing was so you know what they're taking away, and it helps you feel that don't have to get stuck in the prove your value trap because they're telling you what was valuable. And then I found that leads really directly into what's their next steps question, and I really like them leaving with something that they can act on. So I like the thought of also considering the use of the timer if there's two things that they've brought to the table or more.
Yes. Okay, so all of this conversation that we just had, I think a takeaway that's surfacing in my brain right now is like you already have a lot of ideas for questions and strategies that you can ask to help slow down the conversation. It's more about you feeling confident that that instinct that you have is the right thing at that moment.
Yeah, part of that definitely, especially if I'm jumping to here's something you can try, because I definitely see some frustration in different teachers in different situations, and again, you want to alleviate some of it, even though you can't alleviate all of that.
And
Um,
even what we talked about today doesn't mean you're never going to give them a solution, right? It just means that you're giving them the choice in deciding, is that the thing they want to hear a piece of advice from you, or is that something they want to process more, or is that the thing they want to focus on? Whatever it is, it's more about giving that person agency to determine the next step in the conversation that will then uncover what it is that you say next or you ask next.
right. And then, yeah, if you're getting that clarifying question in before, I like that you mentioned it to separate into two questions, because you might not have quite hit on what they're struggling with, depending on how clear they are in what they've shared with you. So, yeah, I would definitely separate it into two questions.
The clarity piece cannot be understated. And
Right?
it's crazy to think about how many assumptions we make in so many different settings and how much value we can get out of. And I don't mean value in the sense of like a product, but like value in the sense of the quality of our conversation by if we're taking the time to clarify.
I agree.
So as thinking about this as your first question, how to get away from the feeling of fixing teachers, what are your thoughts now? What are you thinking about this? How is this feeling for you? What questions are still surfacing in your mind?
Right. I think that during the conversation piece of it is definitely, I feel more confident about. I do feel like because I'm still a teacher, um, I'm probably still going to have that feeling of they're struggling with this. I can tell they're struggling with this, and I can't just go fix it right now. So that might be the second half of my issue of, does that go away? Does that feeling go away? Because you can't really just go in. I mean, your goal is to help them build potential. Your goal isn't to just go in and say, I can see this is your problem. Let's fix it right now. That's not helping, because they probably aren't going to change based on what you're seeing as the issue. So I'm wondering, what is that piece of the observations and how you interact with the teachers around whatever data you're collecting, where do you ever have the chance to steer the conversation towards that issue in any way, or is that just always something that you're sidestepping around or dealing with as you try and work with them on other things?
Okay, I'm hearing multiple things there. Let me see if I got it right. First thing is, I know you're still struggling with, there are probably, and I'm going to use the word simple. I don't necessarily mean simple, but there are probably some direct strategies that particularly some of your like teachers that are struggling with things that maybe are new to teaching that you just want them to know because their lives would be easier if they knew those things. That's like one piece of
Right.
what you're talking about
Yeah.
there. Like, do you ever get over feeling that like I just want to tell you this like easy thing that you could be doing? And then the
Right.
second thing I heard you say is about observations, and it's connected to the first, but it's like you see a thing happening in the classroom and it maybe is not the thing that you're there to talk about, but it's a thing that's like indirectly causing some kind of problem. And how do you bring that thing up? Is
Right.
that, is that what we're talking about now, these two things? Okay,
Yep.
which one of those you want to do first?
I think I have an idea about the first one. I think I have less ideas about the observation one. Like even as you were talking on the first one, I'm like, oh, I bet there's a way that I've already thought of that I could help with that. But
Okay.
it has to do more with spending more time near that teacher or being around them often enough to just listen, to say, hey, how's it going in your classroom, and having them talk to you about it, and maybe it comes up. I feel like that's happened to me a couple times where I've been able to give a solution that's something easy, where it's more like a coaching light situation where you can solve it that way. But if it's a bigger issue, I think that's where I'm struggling the most.
Okay, so that's the one where you want to get into like you've seen a thing in the classroom, whether it's there for a visit or not, you've seen a thing in the
Right.
classroom and you're like, this needs to be addressed and you don't know how to bring it up. Okay, so tell me
Exactly.
a little bit more about that. Like, what is happening and what is that context that we're in right now?
More specifically about, or just in general, like what types of things happen?
Yeah, maybe give me an example of like what types of things happen just so I have some context in my head of what we're talking about.
Okay. So it can be anywhere from um, just calling on one student, so less
Got it.
engagement, to it could be never providing a student choice on writing or reading material, where you can tell the kids are not engaged and they hate it, and they probably want to cheat because they're so upset. So anywhere from that little issues of a simple fix maybe a teacher could try differently with just a strategy, to like a whole way of viewing how you present material.
And that is happening with someone you're, and I'm not like trying to call any names.
Right.
I'm just trying to figure out with someone that you have been working with and they don't see that issue. They're coming to you for something completely different.
Or not at all, both.
Okay.
They're not seeing that, and they're not coming to me, and they aren't necessarily seeing it because they're just new teachers.
Okay. So I think we've got a couple layers that we're talking about here is there is an aspect of your role as a mentor that is really to help teachers make it easier in their first couple of years of teaching.
Right.
And I can totally understand what you're saying is like this tension. Am I like holding back information from them? And I would say if you're mentoring a new teacher and they legitimately don't know about something, that
Okay.
seems like an obvious path to be like, hey, have you considered the fact that you are only, that you need to call on every student? Would you like me to collect some data in your classroom about which students you're calling on? Like that's a very specific context of being a mentor. And then now thinking about coaching, thinking about you're working with teachers who are experienced teachers, they likely know these things, but they're not bringing these strategies for inclusion or differentiation into their classroom practice, even though they probably already know them because they're experienced teachers. And you kind of want to re-highlight that.
Yeah.
How are you currently prompting that conversation in your coaching conversations? Or are you just like completely ignoring it? What are you doing right now?
Um, Occasionally, like in some of those situations, not even really getting a chance to ignore it, but I'm not bringing it up. So if that's the definition of ignoring it, and then occasionally, maybe giving advice that I felt maybe afterwards, um, wasn't they either weren't ready for or they weren't expecting. So then that was like stop the conversation. So both of those situations just definitely not conversational enough to for me to feel like it was successful or helpful to them.
Okay, let's start with the second one because you took an action there and let's like debrief that one. So like
Okay.
when you felt like it happened too fast, you told them too fast. When you look back on that, what do you wish you did in retrospect?
I think I wish I had asked them a question instead, but I also think I wish I would have had, um, no, I feel like I did have data. It maybe wasn't what I think magical data looks like. I'm not even sure why I'm saying it that way, but just my writing down what I see happening, maybe even bringing it up from that perspective. Um, During class, I saw these kids not having to answer, or maybe a question that's like, how many students would you like to have answer your questions? Um, I think maybe asking would have been a better way instead of telling.
What makes you say that?
Um, I I think I wonder if they even knew what I meant. Like maybe not having enough common instructional strategy language. Um, I felt like maybe I was doing a lot of the talking, but again, sometimes that's hard when the mentee mentor and like this is their second year, or maybe even less, that they don't even know that that's an option. So I think that's where I approached it from, of you could try this, and this is a situation when you would want to try it. Um, I think because that didn't come up as part of the thing that was the most helpful, or things that were helpful at the end, then you're wondering, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't have said it that way. Maybe I should have tried to bring it up more differently. And maybe they had questions about it that I didn't address. Like maybe they didn't get how that's something that could be modeled if there was more time. But
Okay. So we're still walking the tightrope here of being a mentor for educators who are new to the field and not
mhm,
being entirely sure if they actually know about all the different strategies that you kind of might want to throw at
right.
them. But the question that you said that you wish you had asked was, how many students would you like to hear answer questions? Do you feel like that's a question that almost any teacher, regardless of their level of experience, could answer?
Yeah, I think I maybe would word it a little bit differently. I'm not sure how yet, but that's the general gist of it. Do you just want one person answering each time you ask a question? Is the gist of it, right? And maybe if they've never seen someone do that, they don't know that it's an option. They're just doing one question at a time seems normal to them because that's what happened to them in school.
Yeah, I mean, that's tough, right? It's like if we, depending on teacher training, depending on our own experience, we just kind of fall back on what we know. And that's the way I did it. That's the way I learned. That's how you teach, right? Okay. So I feel like we're kind of surfacing a really important element here, which is you can't pull out of someone what they don't know. So like
Mhm.
coaching isn't you magically ask a question and then somehow they know the answer to the question, right? We still have to be able to figure out what is it the person already knows. And in
Mhm.
your case, what I'm hearing is this person might know, and maybe not, but like I'll just say this part, this person might know what they want their classroom to look like, sound like, or feel like.
Right. But
And once we uncover that, then
mhm.
we have the potential to ask more questions.
Yeah. So that's more like an ideally question. Like when you're reviewing with students, ideally, how many of them would you like to have answer? I think one of the things that I can feel a little bit better about is having maybe just seen the reaction that went through when I tried to give too much advice. Maybe I tried to bring it back around to some things that I did see that person doing well, and tried to tie that into the conversation of how they were getting kids to respond and when to use the idea I suggested and when to use the one that they were using. So I don't know. I do feel not so awful about it, but I do think you're right about getting clarification on that, and maybe if I have some other ways of asking that ideal question to them, like how many would you like talking about your your content area? How many of the kids do you want to respond?
And what do you think would change the shape of your conversation if you asked that question instead of saying, I only saw two students responding, or I noticed very few students are responding. Here's what you should do. How would asking that question change the next phase of your conversation?
Right. So if they're telling me I only want one kid to respond, I can't imagine anyone saying that, but if they're giving an answer, I guess that probably leads to the next question of,
What makes you say that?
yeah, why would you like more than one kid to respond? And do you have any ways already in your mind that you're thinking of how to try that?
Nice. So how does that feel when we're still kind of walking the tightrope of like fixing and kind of prompting some difficult conversations when we see something in the classroom happening that we're knowing is not really what's best for student learning. How is that feeling when you're trying to like transition that conversation around to something you think they should be thinking about?
Yeah, I feel like I'm going to feel a lot more confident of asking those questions with someone that's definitely my mentee and that's new.
Yep.
Um, I might feel a little bit less likely to address that if it's something that, even though maybe they've been teaching a long time, they still haven't tried strategies for engagement like the ones that we talked about. Um, but I do think it would be more effective if that relationship with that teacher was better. So um, developing the relationship even more first, asking if there's things they're struggling with, and just listening, taking way more time on the coaching light and just trying to hear what they're struggling with before asking questions along the lines of, is it okay if would you like someone to come and watch? Would you do you need or do you want someone to give you suggestions? Those types of things maybe would be easier after there's more of a background information of what I know that more about that teacher.
Okay, so we've got again our two pathways, which is if it's a teacher that you're mentoring, you feel pretty comfortable asking any sort of question with them because they've already opted in for whatever reason, whether they've been
Right.
voluntold or they've chosen to opt in, they're doing it, right? But then you've got
Right.
your colleagues that you're trying to build a coaching relationship with, but they're experienced teachers and they have their own areas of expertise and they may not, be super jazzed about someone telling them what they're doing wrong. And so you're recognizing that having that like really intentional development of that kind of coaching relationship with them will help them feel more safe to be vulnerable and, interested in a deeper coaching conversation with you. I have a question to ask you about that though. Even in those teachers who you feel worried about potentially maybe, offering up some opportunities to engage with you on a deeper level, do you think that those teachers are you talking about teachers who want to improve student learning in their classroom?
I have to assume the answer is yes, because I can't imagine anyone that's at my school or at other schools that I would work with that doesn't want to improve student learning.
So, do you have a shared goal in your work and their work?
I do. Is that what you meant?
Yeah,
Do
I
I
mean,
have a
I
shared,
think
do I have a shared goal with them yet? Is that what you meant?
no, I mean in general, like your shared goal is improving student learning, right?
Yes.
So, if you have that shared goal of improving student learning, if your conversations are about what students are doing in the classroom, does that feel less confrontational than having a conversation about what the teacher is doing in the classroom?
Yeah. I think that's a really great way to like turn our attention to, because if it's what was your goal for what the students were going to do today, um, from your perspective, how did that turn out? What did you see the students doing? What do we want the students to be able to do at the end? I think that takes the pressure off that person, I think, a lot, especially if they are seeing similar things that what you have seen and saying it out loud.
And I think that gets right back to your original question is how to get away from the feeling of fixing teachers. And we kind of got to it in a bunch of different ways in the conversation today
Right.
is we know that our goal isn't directly to fix teachers. We know that our goal is to improve student learning. And we know that the people we're working with in whatever capacity, our mentor, our mentees, or our coaching partners, is we want to improve student learning. So we all have a shared goal of like, how can we ensure that our students are learning in the most engaging or the way that is best for them or the way that's going to get them to their goals. And so kind of shifting your mindset around, it's not really so much about fixing teachers, it's more about improving student learning. That can also change the language you're using when you're asking these questions.
Yeah. That is good to focus on.
I would like to
Definitely.
share, can I share a short story with you?
Yeah.
So I also recently interviewed Steve Barkley for the podcast, and he's been on previous times also talking about the same thing, but because he recently said it to me again, it's really resonating with me. He talked about when he first was a coach and was working, doing coaching work. He was, like you, often focusing on what the teacher is doing. And he had
Okay.
a big mental shift at some point. And now really what he focuses on is what are the students doing? And that also connects to Diane Sweeney's student-centered coaching model. And this idea, I think it all comes around if we can talk about what students are doing, what we want them to be doing, what we want the classroom to look, sound, and feel like, we are getting at whatever might be holding the teacher back, but we're getting at that from the perspective of improving student learning. And that is everybody's shared mission in our school community.
Right. I think that too fits. I know in some of our meetings, we've been talking about even maybe trying to end PLC meetings with how has this meeting improved student learning, and what do you see that might come out of from this meeting to improve student learning? So maybe even trying to move more of the teachers' thinking to that just in general, even just about teachers' meetings, so that it doesn't seem odd when you bring it up in other situations.
Yes. And really, it's hard because I think it's a fallacy to think that if we just talk about what students are doing, we're never talking about what teachers are doing, because at some point the teacher is going to do something different to help the students do something different. But it's a
Right.
lot more comfortable and more aligned when we look at it from that perspective.
Right. It even makes that discussion about assessment data more no, less stressful for the teacher, because it's not about what you did. It's about, here's how my students did, here's their scores, here's these other scores, and we're just looking at the data of what the students did, and not putting so much pressure on it that way. So I think it's from lots of different levels, a way to keep conversations going in a positive manner.
Yes. And you don't have to address every single thing, every single conversation. Sometimes even you as a coach are in the moment and you're like prioritizing. I know they want me to talk about this one thing. We want to talk about this one thing, but actually this one thing is like 65 different things. And so in our conversation, I'm going to be coaching them through this part of this one thing. And that means the next time we have a conversation, they're going to feel a level of success and they're going to want to come back. And maybe they're ready to move on to something else. That's totally fine. But
Right.
that processing has helped them move forward in their thinking in the way that is going to get them to where they ultimately want to go.
Right.
All right.
Awesome.
Having had that conversation, what was most helpful for you today?
Cool. I think just having a name to put on the prove your value trap, I really like that, because it'll give me a way to be thinking about what's going on in my mind. Being reminded of things that I know how to do, and just having someone else say, yep, that's the right thing to do. Keep going with that. Lots of other things, just having someone ask me the question so I can hear myself say the question that I would ask. So that I know I can do that. That's very helpful. Trying to keep in mind the different ways that you would interact with different teachers. Like maybe you would provide different support to the new teacher or the second year teacher in a whole different way, where it's more of it's kind of like triage. You're like, I'm gonna make sure you get some quick ideas, even if it's just a try, and even if it fails, at least you'll have a different way of doing things than what you've tried. I think especially thinking about shifting my mindset to always be thinking about how we can improve student learning is probably the biggest takeaway of all of the conversation. So yeah, those are some things.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing this conversation on the podcast and letting us kind of talk this out in this visible space, because I think it is really helpful for other teachers to process what is it like to transition from a classroom role to a coaching role. It's not just an automatic thing, right? And one of the things that I talk about a lot is coaching is a concrete skill. It's a skill anyone can develop if they so desire, but it's a skill you are going to practice and figure out how to do. It's not something you just roll out of bed and you're like, now I know how to coach. So I really appreciate having the time with you to go through some of that thinking, because all of the thoughts you shared today, you're not alone. People moving into this role and wanting to develop into this role, these are the kinds of thoughts that are ruminating in their mind. So thank you for surfacing those, and thank you for letting us have this conversation in a visible space.
Yes, you are welcome. It was wonderful. Thanks a lot.
My pleasure. Thanks for watching this conversation with Vicki. If this conversation resonated with you, you are not alone. Learning how to lean into asking questions rather than offering a solution is a huge part of making the move to a coaching role. We are so busy as teachers that we can often feel pressure to fix any issues that arise right away, which makes it hard to remember to slow down and support the thinking of your coaching partner first. If you're ready to start building these skills, you'll love our courses for coaches. Our program, designed specifically for classroom teachers, is called Getting Started as an Instructional Coach. That's the course that Vicki took, and it's the introductory course to the Coach Certificate and Mentorship Program. If you are new to coaching and you want to make the transition from classroom to coach as smooth as possible, this is the course for you. Please come join us in our next global cohort of Getting Started as an Instructional Coach. This course is specifically designed for classroom teachers that are moving into a coaching role, so you're prepared for the transition. It's focused on exactly the skill set and mindset shifts you need to make so you can be successful in your first years as an instructional coach. We only open registration for our global cohorts once a year, so find all the details and get on the waiting list at edurolearning.com/getting started. To get a peek at what you'll learn, watch our free New to Coaching workshop, which highlights the key mindset and skill set shifts you'll need when moving from classroom to coaching. Find it at coachbetter.tv/workshops. If you'd like a transcript of this conversation and all of our other resources for instructional coaches, head over to our website at CoachBetterTV to find the show notes for today's episode. If you've made it this far into the episode, let's chat. Leave me a comment below, or find me on social media at Eduro Learning and send me a message about what you took away from today's episode. Let's start a conversation to see how we can work together to create a thriving coaching culture in your school setting. See you next time.